as clinicians in general, to have more courses, continuing education on what empathy really is, because it seems like, at least the schoolings we've been through, or I've been through, we went through the same program, but even other schools, is we're almost taught to be fixers, right? To make something better. Something comes in, let's do anything we can to quote unquote fix it or make it better. That's not necessarily empathy, though.
No, that's not empathy at all. There's nothing,
Right?
there's no empathy. I mean, I feel like empathy is more of understanding, meeting people where they're at, and being sympathetic to their situations. Like with the loss thing versus our culture, where I don't feel like the US does a good job with death in general. And, where in some cultures it's honored, and you get to see the body, and, there's whole rituals and ceremonies for days or weeks to, so I think that it's just hard to figure that out here in this culture. Like, people are just not talking about it.
Yeah.
So how that equates to shame, or, just the loss of empathy. I found that when I had my loss, I had to ask for what I needed. Even being as weak as I was, I would have someone come over to my house and be like, oh, you can have another baby. And I would stare at them stunned and say, that is not helpful for me to say. You could just say, I'm sorry, I don't know what to say. And I would turn around and walk away. Because I realized other people are grieving. They don't know how to interact with me. Like, I don't want to be rude to them, but that is the wrong thing to say, or to go up and touch somebody who you think is pregnant that could have just gave birth to a dead baby is pretty freaking horrifying. And if some stupid person is going to do that to me, I'm going to inform them why I'm sobbing because of their comment.
Yeah.
So,
And how re-traumatizing as well, right? Like, in all the ways.
yeah.
Right. Right. Oh my gosh. And this really reminds me, ties back to our first conversation in terms of like so much assumption. Like, like maybe there's cultural assumptions that need to get broken down a little more about body respect. Like, pregnant or not pregnant, you don't go up and put your hand on anyone's belly, regardless.
You know what I used to do? Every time somebody would touch my belly, I would touch theirs, and they would turn around shocked. And I'm just like, what makes you think I want you to touch my belly? Do I know
Right?
you? Like, who are
Right.
you?
Right. Yeah. And I remember the first time someone did that to me, I was so stunned. I went into my own safety mechanism, which was be quiet, don't say anything, pretend it didn't matter. Right. That's because that's just how I was raised. And then I was like furious. Right. And so the next time it happened, I was ready. Right. Like, I backed away. And then one time they were like, oh, I just wanted to touch your belly. And I was like, oh, okay. Can I touch your belly then too? And the same thing, that shock. Well, why would you want to touch my belly? And then they realized, well, I don't know if they realized, but you could see that shock of like, oh, wait, what's going on here?
Yeah, that was really
I,
stupid. Very
I
stupid.
hope they realized. I hope they realized what was going on there.
Yeah.
So yeah, this idea of empathy as a practitioner, right? We're not there to necessarily fix, but we are there to somehow support the person in the journey that they're going through. And so it's really imperative especially if you're like a family practice and you are seeing everything from back pain to fertility to pregnancy and postnatal, it's so important to get some type of training. You have CEUs, right? For acupuncturists?
I do have CEUs on Net of Knowledge.
Okay, Net of Knowledge. Yeah.
CEUs are held. I think that listening is such a big part of this empathy. And I remember like clinical counseling, I think it was back in PCOM, we learned how to listen. And I think that people really need to develop that crucial communication skill to be good healers. If we're talking about, from the acupuncturist, from the practitioner side, really listening, and not listening to tell them what you think they need to hear, listening to just be present. I've found that when a woman gives birth in my clinic, where she gives birth in the hospital or the birth center or wherever, she comes back to my clinic and tells me her story postpartum, I allow an extra 30 minutes for that visit. That first visit back, because she might be breastfeeding, she might have her baby. And then also because if I ask her, tell me your birth story, it could take 20 minutes easily. And that could still be the abbreviated version. So I think finding a way to ask the questions and listen when you have time, like, if you don't really have time in the beginning, say, I really want to hear your story, but I'd like to get you on the table and get a couple points in first, something like that. But then really listening to them and maybe charting some of those details, charting their baby's name so that you could say that back to them. That can be very, very helpful. And I do think, like, making a plan, especially if this is a pregnancy loss, that, once they have a loss or 2 or 3 or 4, and they're starting to see a natural practitioner, you start to educate them on how, it takes a little bit of time. If your body's out of whack and you keep putting another baby in, it might not be the right time. Let's give ourselves 3 to 6 months to rebuild and, reevaluate and try again.
Yeah, thank you. That's so helpful. And I'll link in Net of Knowledge, your courses, so that if there's any clinicians, not just acupuncturists, but it seems like if you're working with pregnant people, is it just for acupuncturists, these courses?
I really think that it could be for any practitioner. And I talk about acupressure a lot for labor and birth in my classes, because I don't think it has to only be acupuncture. So my courses are all about birth and postpartum right now. And I'll continue to crank them out.
Yeah, awesome. And I'll keep feeding you more ideas if you need.
Honey, you're so cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. You have so much wisdom to share, and you just being a little older and wiser on this path. To me, I see you as that mentor relationship, which is also another thing. Like, as you were talking, your birth was your first birth. My birth was my first birth that I ever attended. And I just think about, in the United States, culturally, almost the disconnect we've almost created for ourselves, and in this idea of independence, and I can do it myself, and but we've lost that sense of community where the first birth I see is my own.
Yeah,
right?
and it takes a village, especially around pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. It takes a village.
So if I've never seen a pregnancy from beginning to end and then passed, and been part of a community that also recognizes and has its rituals in all the different stages, I don't even know how to honor that in myself. I don't know. My mom doesn't know how to honor that for me, and then me for my daughter. I mean, as I'm having this conversation, I'm getting all like, oh, I have to do this. Like, now I have a new motivation, right? So that I can be there for my daughter, so that she can be part of understanding this part, that life only continues in this process that we're talking about, which is conception and birth and loss and reconception and postnatal. Like, there's all these phases of life that I didn't grow up seeing. And I wonder if it's just so many generations removed from being part of that communal role modeling.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a disconnect in the US. And I think that in the 1920s, when the hospitals like the AMA became established, it kind of moved away from people, talking and the women sharing, to like, the doctor knows best and the white man in the lab coat knows everything, and wouldn't dare talk back to the doctor. And so, it's kind of evolved to where we are today.
Well, thank you for being part of that mending, that bringing back the importance of that remembering. I call it, like, we're in the time of a great forgetting.
Yes.
Right. And many of us have come back to this planet, whether it's through music or Chinese medicine or being a scientist, to help remember, right? Like, to usher in the great remembering after the great forgetting. And I can see so much how you're part of that in so many ways. So I just want to I
Thank
see
you.
you. I adore you. And thank you again for all your precious time.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. I love doing this. I really want to share my knowledge, and if it helps one person, it makes me so happy. So that's awesome.
Perfect. Thank
Yeah.
you.
You're welcome.